The first demolition hammer broke against Winifred Oswelle's smallest ash brick house before Dragon King Cedran finished reading the condemnation order. No one cheered. The workers who lived beside the dragon forges knew better than to celebrate too early. They stood with soot in their hair, children pressed behind skirts, and ownership tags tied around wrists with red cord. Behind them rose 2 rows of humble homes the court had spent a month calling ugly. Low red walls, dark mortar, smoke vents shaped for forge wind, door frames reinforced with ash, lime bands. They did not shine like palace stone. They kept families alive when sparks fell from dragon kilns. That had never been enough for men who judged safety by polish. Mason Lord Belric Thorne stood beside the royal demolition line, his face arranged into pity. Your Majesty, this is precisely the instability I warned of. Improvised material resists clean removal. Resistance is not proof of strength. It is proof of unpredictable binding. Winifred kept both hands on the shelter ledger, pressed to her chest. She was 43, widowed, smoke-lined at the eyes, and tired of nobles who mistook survival for disorder. Her husband had once mixed shelter mortar beside her in rain. Now court masons spoke of her homes as if they were stains on the capital's hem. These houses are occupied, she said. They cannot be condemned before ownership review and fire stress inspection. Belric gave a soft sigh. Mistress Oswelle has confused sentiment with structure. The structure is why they are still standing. A builder would know that walls may stand and be unfit. A mason would know that before condemning them, he should test the brick. Cedran looked down from his black dragon horse, crown bright against the smoke-heavy sky. His eyes were the color of banked coals. Fire moved under his skin when anger stirred. Once, years ago, before the crown hardened around him, he had hidden in Redwall during a forge storm. Noble escorts had lost him in smoke. Winifred had pulled him into an ash-brick shelter while sparks struck the roof. He had been a prince then, coughing soot, shocked that worker walls could hold where polished arches cracked. Now he held Belric's report gloved. Winifred Oswelle, Cedran said. Redwall District has been declared unsafe for continued residence pending reconstruction. By inspection? By Royal Building Review. By Belric's report, she said. The air changed around the king's guard. Belric's expression remained controlled. Mason Lord reports are royal review when accepted by the crown. And were the homes entered? Exterior signs were sufficient. Irregular brick size, darkened mortar, unauthorized formula, inconsistent facade lines, worker density above noble safety recommendation, no interior heat reading, no seam sample, no forge flare comparison. Exterior review could condemn color, line, and polish. It could not measure how a wall carried heat. Ugly, Winifred said. You mean ugly? Cedran's jaw tightened. Do not reduce safety law to insult. Then do not reduce homes to appearance. Belric stepped neatly into the space. Your Majesty, relocation wagons wait. Demolition must proceed before evening heat cycle. Winifred turned toward the district. No one lowers ownership cord. Every worker lifted a wrist. Red cords, small tags, names burned into tin, legal possession, tax status, hearth registration, and shelter right. Belric's mouth thinned. Organized obstruction. Recorded ownership, Winifred answered. Ownership did not make brick stronger. It made demolition unlawful until emergency proof was entered. Cedran dismounted. Heat rolled outward when his boots touched ground, and the children shrank back. Emergency proof is the Mason report, Cedran said. No, she answered. A report is accusation. Proof is test. His eyes held hers. You will stand aside. I will stand where my name is entered. Belric gave the demolition captain a small nod. The second hammer team approached the corner house. Iron hooks bit into the ash brick seam. The bricks tightened. Not loudly. Not like magic in a minstrel tale. The mortar line darkened, drew inward, and locked with a low grinding sound every builder in the district recognized. Living ash bricks did not wake for pride. They locked under heat stress and internal ash pressure, the way shelter mortar was designed to do during forge flare. A lawful occupied wall could not be demolished without stress-proof. The ash lime matrix itself distributed force through every brick around the hearth. The hooks bent. One snapped. A demolition man cursed and fell backward. The ash lime seam had not resisted the king. It had resisted the wrong test. A bent hook did not clear the house. It only proved the report had not measured the force it ordered men to use. Belric's eyes narrowed. Dangerous binding, Your Majesty. If left standing, such material could trap families in fire. A failed demolition strike was not acquittal. It was a demand for the inspection he had skipped. Winifred looked at Cedran. They have survived 6 forge flares because the walls bind before flame finds the seams. Cedran did not answer. Then a deeper sound came from behind them. Not from Redwall, from the palace road. Everyone turned. The palace wall did not fall, but its newest white stone failed the first stress echo with a crack wide enough for the court to see. One decorative block sheared outward from the king's west expansion wall, and a hairline fracture ran through the carved dragon relief where polished stone should have carried the impact. Dust slid down the royal road. Belric went still. Winifred did not smile. She looked first for bodies, not victory. Cedran saw that. His gaze moved from the damaged palace stone back to her face with something sharper than anger. The palace wall stood, but wounded. Standing was not the same as safe. Winifred knew that better than any man in the road. The stress failure did not prove Belric Thorne had lied. It did not prove Winifred's formula belonged in every royal building. It proved only that the homes condemned as unsafe had withstood a stress echo the polished palace stone had failed to carry. Cedran looked at the cracked dragon relief, then at Belric's sealed report. Not apology, not trust, not yet. Only the first fracture in a judgment he had signed, without entering the homes. Winifred opened her shelter ledger. The next record, she said, will not ask whether worker walls look noble enough. It will ask why Redwall was condemned without the stress test the palace stone had just failed to pass. The cracked palace stone did not prove Belric Thorne had lied. It only showed Redwall had been condemned by exterior review, while the first visible stress failure belonged to royal stone. Winifred Oswelle stayed beside the corner house, with her shelter ledger open against her palms. The broken demolition hammer lay in the dust like an accusation too simple to trust. Around it, the ash brick wall had quieted again. No glow, no loyal magic, only a darkened mortar seam that had locked under force and then settled, the way a good shelter wall should settle after stress. Cedran Vaymark did not order a second strike. That was not mercy. It was caution forced on him by cracked palace stone. Mason Lord Belric Thorne stepped toward the damaged road wall, white dust touching his blue mason cloak. Your Majesty, the west expansion stone has not failed. A decorative face block sheared from impact echo. That requires repair, not panic. Winifred looked at the fracture through the carved dragon relief. Standing is not safe. Belric turned. Nor is stubbornness engineering. Then open the engineering. Cedran's eyes moved from the worker homes to the west wall. Inspection packet. A royal clerk brought Belric's bound report to a folding table set between the district and the demolition line. No one invited Winifred forward. The guard remained near enough to remind the workers that legal words could still be treated as disobedience. Cedran broke the outer cord himself. Checklist. The clerk read, Redwall Worker District Exterior Building Review. Criteria. Wall alignment. Facade consistency. Smoke discoloration. Unlicensed ash formula. Worker density. Roofline uniformity. Street clearance. Drainage appearance. And relocation feasibility. Winifred waited. Cedran heard the absence before she spoke. Interior inspection? Not entered. Interior heat reading? Not entered. Seam sample? Not entered. Fire? Stress test? Marked not required due exterior instability indicators. Not required was the most dangerous phrase in any report written before a family was moved. Belrick inclined his head. When exterior signs show structural irregularity, full stress testing can endanger residents and inspectors. Condemnation protects the poor from the danger they have grown used to living inside. Winifred kept her voice level. A stress test does not begin by breaking a wall. It begins with heat reading, seam scrape, ash, lime ratio, and pressure line. None of those requires a child to leave her bed. Cedran looked toward the scribe. Enter Winifred Oswelle as technical builder witness. She may answer on ashbrick construction and shelter law when called. Her authority is not restored. Demolition remains suspended pending review. Not restored. Not believed. Useful because the palace stone had cracked loudly enough to make her knowledge inconvenient to ignore. Ownership cord law, Cedran said. The district registrar came forward, holding a tin tag ledger. Red cords indicate legal possession, tax standing, hearth registration, and emergency shelter right. Occupied shelter protection bars demolition, while residents are inside corded property unless emergency proof is entered. Does a Mason report count as emergency proof? Cedran asked. The registrar's eyes flicked toward Belrick. Only if supported by active danger finding, interior heat failure, seam collapse, smoke backflow, foundation shift or fire, stress failure. Were any entered? No, Your Majesty. Belrick spoke smoothly. Exterior instability is an active danger when the settlement is dense. Not under the cord law, Winifred said. Density may trigger relocation review. It does not replace shelter proof. Cedran allowed the words into record. Ash brick formula registry. Winifred opened her ledger to the red-stained pages. Red wall ash. Brick mix registered under shelter variance 32. Furnace ash. Lime binder. Ground kiln shell. River sand. And pressure ash. Filed after the third forge flare. The building clerk confirmed reluctantly. Formula variance entered. Renewal pending because Mason Guild certification was not attached. Pending renewal was not condemnation. It was the reason inspection should have been completed. Belrick said, A registry is not approval. It is a notice that an unauthorized material exists. A notice the city accepted for tax protection, shelter count, and forge risk housing, Winifred replied. If the formula was unauthorized for safety, the district should not have been counted as protected shelter for 6 years. Forge. Flare survival records. A forge warden stepped forward. Redwall shelters withstood 6 forge flare events, 2 red roof scorches, no wall breach entered, 3 smoke vent adjustments, 1 doorframe replacement, no occupant death by wall failure. No one cheered. The record was too serious for triumph. Belrick's report includes those? Cedran asked. The clerk searched the packet. Reference to forge exposure present. Survival details not attached. Summary states repeated exposure has degraded appearance and likely structural reliability. A summary had turned 6. Survived forge flares into degradation by appearance. Likely, Winifred said softly. Belrick's gaze sharpened. Experience tells a Mason what ledgers cannot. A Mason would know that before condemning them, he should test the brick. The repeated sentence landed harder now because the packet lay open. Cedran turned toward the palace road. West Expansion Stone Supply Ledger. Belrick's posture did not change. Composure was not proof. The palace steward opened another ledger. West Expansion Wall supplied through Thorn Masonry House under royal contract. Stone. White veined decorative firestone. Inspection status. Visual acceptance. Polish grade approved. Relief carving approved. Seam finish approved. A supplier name was not gilt. It was only the first route a contract ledger could follow. Stress test? The steward hesitated. Not entered. Heat? Carry test? Not entered. Impact echo test? Not entered. Belric answered before Cedran could look at him. Decorative palace walling is not forge shelter. It serves ceremonial enclosure, not worker fire defense. Winifred looked at the cracked dragon relief. Then it should not have failed the echo from a worker demolition strike. The scribe entered it. The inspection packet. Ownership cord law. Formula registry. Forge flare survival records. And palace supply ledger did not prove Belric Thorne had falsified anything. They did not prove every Redwall house was safe. They proved Redwall had been condemned without the tests required to remove occupied shelters, while the royal stone supplied under visual approval had no stress record of its own. Then the palace steward found a small notation beneath the West Expansion acceptance line. Your Majesty, he said. The stone was accepted under facade priority. Cedran's voice lowered. Meaning? The steward read, Fire stress test deferred under facade priority to preserve carving schedule before royal procession. Priority did not break stone by itself. It only showed which test had been postponed for beauty. Winifred closed her ledger slowly. The next record would have to show who let facade priority replace fire stress testing, while occupied worker homes were condemned by exterior review. Facade priority did not prove Belric Thorne had endangered the palace. It only showed a fire stress test had been deferred for royal display, while occupied worker homes were condemned without one. Winifred Oswelle stood under guard beside the folding table, while the palace steward laid the facade priority file next to Belric's report. The workers of Redwall stayed behind their ownership cords, quieter now than they had been when the hammer broke. Fear had learned from the records. A cracked palace wall did not save a home. A missing test did not stop a king, unless the law forced him to read the absence aloud. Cedran Vaymark kept his gaze on the file. Authorization route, the palace steward read. West expansion wall, royal procession preparation, facade priority approved to preserve carving schedule and ceremonial frontage. Fire stress test deferred until after procession. Who approved facade priority? Cedran asked. Procession Works Office request, accepted by Palace Building Review. Names. The steward hesitated. Request prepared by Procession Clerk Avel Rusk. Building Review acceptance, marked by Mason Office Clerk seal. Final contract notation entered through Thorne Masonry House. Belric Thorne lifted one hand, smooth as polished stone. Mason Office Clerk seals are routine. A contract house may receive notation without the Lord personally reviewing every scheduling adjustment. Winifred looked at the cracked dragon relief. Routine is not harmless when it moves a test past the day. The wall is meant to stand before the city. Cedran looked toward the scribe. Entered as technical builder witness statement. Winifred Oswelle may read inspection files under guard. Her authority is not restored. A record could borrow her knowledge, while still refusing her standing. Fire, stress deferral, Cedran said. The building clerk opened a smaller slip. Deferred due schedule compression before royal procession. Visual acceptance allowed temporary completion. Test to follow within 2 moon turns. Was temporary completion marked visible in the royal summary? No, Your Majesty. The summary stated West Expansion ready for procession. Ready had reached the king without the word deferred attached, Belric said. Because it was ready for procession. A deferred test does not mean unsafe. It means scheduled. Then the word scheduled should have stood beside the word ready, Winifred said. Cedran did not defend her. He did not silence her either. Royal procession deadline, he ordered. A procession clerk came forward. The West Road ceremony was moved forward after noble guests confirmed early arrival. Ceremonial frontage required completion before the Flame Banner March. Who moved it forward? Royal Household Calendar. Approved by the Procession Council. Did I receive notice that fire stress testing moved after the ceremony? No direct warning entered. Cedran's eyes moved toward Redwall, toward the shelter where smoke had driven him inside and Winifred's wall had held. The memory did not soften him. It shamed him. And shame in a king could still choose pride. Thorn Masonry Supply Ledger, Cedran said. The steward turned pages. Stone supplied through Thorn Masonry House. White-veined decorative firestone, polish grade high, carving quality approved, seam finish approved. Supplier route includes quarry broker Sarn Fell, finishing yard of Thorn House, delivery by Palace Road Crew. A route, Winifred said. Not guilt. Winifred had spent too many years being condemned by shortcuts to use one herself. Belrick's eyes moved to her briefly. Perhaps he expected accusation, and did not understand why she refused to give him the easy version of his defense. Stress history of that stone type, Cedran asked. The clerk searched. Decorative firestone approved for facade and ceremonial walling. Heat carry rating moderate. Impact echo rating not entered for this batch. Batch sample, visual sample approved. No pressure sample recorded before installation. Belrick's voice cooled. Ceremonial walls are not forged shelters. Comparing palace facade to worker housing misstates purpose. Purpose does not cancel stress, Winifred answered. It only changes which stress must be tested. Entered, Cedran said. Then he pointed to her ledger. Redwall renewal file? A city building clerk brought a worn folder tied with dirty red cord. Shelter. Variance 32. Renewal pending. Required items. Mason Guild certification. Seam sample review. Forge. Flare survival log. Interior heat reading. And occupancy map. Which are present. Forge. Flare survival log present. Occupancy map present. Ownership records present. Seam sample requested but not scheduled. Interior heat reading requested but not scheduled. Mason Guild certification absent. Why absent? The clerk glanced at Belrick. Guild certification requires review slot from the Mason office. Was a slot granted? No. Marked delayed for formula irregularity review and priority palace works. Winifred closed her hand around the shelter ledger. So Redwall renewal waited for Mason office review, while the same office accepted exterior condemnation. Belrick answered evenly. Irregular materials require caution. Then caution should have tested them before condemning them. The scribe wrote it. The facade file, deferral slip, procession schedule, supply ledger, and Redwall renewal folder did not prove Belrick Thorn had falsified anything. They did not prove the palace stone was corrupt. They proved a royal wall received visual acceptance while its stress test moved after display, and Redwall's safety renewal stalled because the very office judging its formula never scheduled the tests it required. Cedran looked from the cracked palace stone to the red homes. What did my demolition summary say? The royal clerk read, Redwall unsafe by exterior review, relocation urgent, demolition recommended before evening heat cycle, formula irregular, worker density risk, Mason Guild certification absent. Did it say the certification slot had not been granted? Cedran's hand stilled over the report, not with apology, but with the first visible weight of a command returning to its source. No. Did it say interior heat reading and seam sample were requested but unscheduled? No. Did it say palace facade priority had deferred the same kind of stress proof on royal stone? No, Your Majesty. The silence that followed did not restore Winifred. It only made the king stand inside the summary he had trusted. Then the city clerk found a folded work order strip beneath the Redwall renewal file. Your Majesty, he said. There is a cancellation notice for the seam sample. Cedran's voice lowered. Read it. Redwall seam sample review cancelled. Reason. District slated for removal. No need to test material scheduled for demolition. A cancellation notice was not yet a culprit. It was a date the court could not afford to read in the wrong order. The district had been condemned because it lacked tests. The tests had been cancelled because it was condemned. The next record would have to show who dated the removal classification before the seam sample cancellation and who benefited when the circle closed. The cancelled seam sample did not prove Belric Thorne had trapped Redwall. It only showed the district's missing proof had been removed after someone marked the homes for removal. The work order strip lay between Winifred Oswelle's shelter ledger and Cedran Vaymark's royal summary, small enough to be misplaced, sharp enough to cut through a king's command. Redwall seam sample review cancelled. Reason: district slated for removal. No need to test material scheduled for demolition. No one in the worker district moved. The red ownership cords stayed lifted around wrists and doorposts, not in triumph, but in the brittle discipline of people who knew a record could save them only if it was read in the right order. A missing test had nearly cost them their homes. A cancelled test might still become another excuse if the court decided the circle was too ordinary to be wicked. Cedran's voice was controlled. Chronology. The Mason office scheduling clerk stepped forward with a long Q ledger chained in brass. His name was Fenner Vale, and his hands were stained with ordinary ink, not villainy. Winifred was permitted 3 steps nearer the table under guard. Not seated, not restored. Allowed to see the ledger because the king now needed the woman. He had silence to tell him whether the dates meant anything. "Read the seam sample request first," Cedran ordered. Fenner swallowed. Redwall Shelter Variance 32. Seam sample review requested on the 17th day of Emberwain. Requested by City Building Registry after renewal file marked incomplete. Purpose: confirm ash, lime ratio, pressure ash distribution, mortar lock behavior after heat exposure, and forge flare suitability. Winifred looked at Cedran. "Those are the tests that should have existed before the first hammer." He did not answer. The old memory moved behind his eyes again, that night of smoke and heat when a worker wall had stood between him and death. Memory was not apology. It was only the first place shame found a door. "Was a slot assigned?" Cedran asked. "Preliminary slot assigned for the 21st day," Fenner said. Then delayed. "Why?" "Formula irregularity review and priority palace works." Belric Thorne spoke without heat. "That is a lawful Q reason. Palace works before royal procession required certified masons." Redwall's formula lacked guild confirmation. Formula lacked confirmation because the Mason office had not reviewed it, Winifred said. Belric inclined his head, which is why it waited in review. A perfect circle could sound like procedure if each link was read alone. Cedran pointed to the ledger. Removal classification date. Fenner turned 2 pages. Preliminary removal classification entered on the 19th day of Emberwain. Winifred's fingers tightened on the shelter ledger. "Before the seam sample slot?" Cedran said. "Yes, Your Majesty. Before the demolition summary reached me?" The royal clerk checked Cedran's packet. "Your Majesty received the demolition summary on the 23rd day. Who entered removal classification?" Fenner's voice thinned. "Mason office intake clerk seal. Initials RM. Name: Rule Damern." Belric's jaw flexed once. "An intake clerk may classify a district according to review stage. Removal classification does not itself order demolition." "No," Winifred said, but it told the scheduling office the material no longer needed to be tested. "Entered," Cedran said. "Cancellation date," he ordered. Fenner read, "Seam sample review cancelled on the 20th day. Reason: district slated for removal." Cedran looked down at the dates. 19th. Removal classification. 20th. Test cancelled. 21st. Test would have been performed. 23rd. King received summary. Today. Demolition. The order of it stood on the table more clearly than any accusation. Who cancelled the seam sample? Scheduling desk cancellation seal, Fenner said. My desk. Your hand. My seal group, Your Majesty. I did not personally enter this line. Name attached? Assistant Scheduler, Orla Vesk. The guard beside Winifred shifted. The workers behind her did not celebrate. Clerks were often the hands of larger habits. A name was not yet a scheme. Cedran's tone hardened. Was the cancellation in my royal summary? No, Your Majesty, the royal clerk said. Was the removal classification date included? No. Was the circular reason included tests missing because the district was marked for removal, and removal justified because tests were missing? The clerk lowered his eyes. No, the summary had not lied loudly. It had omitted order, and order was where the trap lived. Evening heat cycle, Cedran said. A forge warden stepped forward. Today's heat cycle is high but ordinary. No active wall failure reported in Redwall. House 7 has a smoke vent repair pending. House 12 has roof scorch from last flare, stable after patch. No emergency evacuation entry. Belric said, high heat cycle is exactly why delay can be dangerous. Danger requires a finding, Winifred said. Not a season. The forge warden nodded. No active danger finding entered. Cedran closed his hand over the edge of the demolition summary. His knuckles whitened, not with tenderness, but with the visible pressure of a command returning from paper to flesh. Demolition summary route, he said. The royal clerk read, Mason Office Exterior Review sent to City Building Registry. Registry appended relocation feasibility. Mason Office classification added. District slated for removal. Royal Building Review. Condensed packet. Palace Administrative Desk prepared Crown Summary. Summary delivered to Dragon King Cedran Vaymark for signature. Who condensed it? Royal Building Review Clerk Seal. Countersigned by Palace Administrative Desk. Belric's personal signature. The clerk examined the packet. Belric Thorne's signature appears on the exterior review cover and safety recommendation. Removal classification and cancellation notices bear clerk seals, not his personal hand. Belric looked toward Winifred as if to say the record had spoken enough. She did not give him accusation. She gave him accuracy. His hand is not on the loop yet. His report began the route that let the loop matter. The scribe wrote it. The cancellation chronology, scheduling queue, heat cycle log, and summary route did not prove Belric Thorne ordered the seam sample cancelled. They did not prove the Mason office had conspired against Redwall. They proved the removal label came before the test. The cancelled test helped justify removal, and Cedran's summary hid the circle that made both look lawful. Then Fenner Vale found the line directly below Redwall's cancelled seam sample. The 21st day slot was reassigned, he said. Cedran's eyes lifted. To what? Fenner read, West Expansion Finishing Yard. Pressure sample review for decorative Firestone batch held at Thornhouse. Winifred went very still. The next record would have to show why Redwall's cancelled test slot was given to Palace Stone after the worker district had already been marked for demolition. The reassigned test slot did not prove Belric Thorne had stolen Redwall's safety review. It only showed the inspection time taken from worker homes had been used to examine Palace Stone after the district was already marked for removal. Winifred Oswelle did not move when Fenner Vale read the line. West Expansion Finishing Yard. Pressure sample review for decorative Firestone batch held at Thornhouse. A test slot could not bleed. It could not cough smoke. It could not stand beside a child's bed while sparks hissed against the shutters. That was why men treated schedules as harmless. But in Redwall, a date could decide whether a wall was measured before a hammer touched it, and whether a family was moved, because proof had been denied. Cedran Vaymark looked toward the west road, where the cracked dragon relief still shed pale dust. Read the reassignment order. Fenner turned the ledger with both hands. Original slot. Redwall Shelter Variance 32 Seam Sample Review. Cancelled on the 20th day due removal classification. Reassigned on the same afternoon to West Expansion Finishing Yard for pressure sample review. Who requested reassignment? Mason Office Scheduling Note. Request attached to Palace Works priority list. Name. Priority list prepared by Palace Works Coordinator Dalen Orst. Mason Office acceptance by Clerk Seal R.M. The initials returned to the table like a nail driven twice. Rule the mern again, Cedran said. Belric's voice remained composed. A scheduling clerk may process multiple urgent items in a small office. Repeated initials are not evidence of misconduct. No, Winifred said. They are evidence of a route. The scribe entered it. Cedran allowed her to lean over the ledger under guard. The guard's shadow fell across the page, a reminder that the kingdom could use her eyes while still refusing her place. Pressure sample purpose, Cedran ordered. Fenner read. Decorative Firestone Batch, West Expansion Relief Course. Purpose, confirm pressure behavior after carving hairline observed in finishing yard. Winifred's eyes lifted. There was a hairline before installation? Belric answered before Fenner could. Carving marks are common in veined decorative stone. They are not structural cracks. Then the sample should have said that before the wall faced the road. Cedran's jaw worked once. Was the pressure review completed? Fenner looked to the palace steward. The steward opened the Thornhouse delivery packet. Review marked partial. Sample face polished and tapped. No full heat. Carry or impact echo test. Pressure rating accepted for ceremonial placement. Winifred closed her eyes for one breath. Partial. Accepted. Ceremonial. Words soft enough to pass through a palace gate. Why was a partial review accepted? Cedran asked. Royal procession schedule, the steward said. Facade priority still active. Belric spread one hand. Temporary acceptance for ceremonial use is not unlawful. Fire stress completion was deferred, not erased. Winifred kept her voice steady. Redwall was not granted temporary protection while its tests waited. It was granted demolition. The workers behind her made no sound. Their silence had grown heavier than protest. Enter it, Cedran said. A furnace warden came forward with the forge flare ledger. Your Majesty. Redwall House 7 was due for seam sample because its vent patch survived the last flare without wall bloom. House 12 due because roof scorch did not enter brick line. The slot would have given actual comparison between heat exposure and seam behavior. Was that noted in the renewal file? Cedran asked. Yes. Attached under forge. Flare survival details. Was it in my summary? No, Your Majesty. Cedran's hand hovered over the summary. For an instant, the road seemed to vanish around him, and the old shelter returned in the look he could not quite control. Smoke, a woman's hand dragging him down, red walls taking the heat he had been too proud to fear. The memory did not make him kind. It made his silence harder to bear. Thornhouse batch ledger, he said. The palace steward read, White-veined decorative firestone batch. W19. Quarry broker Sarn Fell. Finished at Thornhouse Yard. Carving schedule advanced. Pressure review partial. Full stress completion pending. Batch W19 used in the cracked relief? Cedran asked. Yes, Your Majesty. Used elsewhere? West expansion. Lower course. Ceremonial road arch. And 2 inner courtyard screens. A low disturbance moved through the court. Not celebration. Fear had found its way uphill. Belric's mouth tightened. Again. These are decorative placements, not occupied forge shelters. Winifred turned to him. Then do not call worker shelters unsafe by decoration, while giving decorative stone the benefit of unfinished tests. The sentence struck the road cleanly. The reassignment ledger, pressure review, batch file, forge flare notes, and royal summary did not prove Belric Thorn had arranged the loop. They did not prove the palace stone would fail beyond the cracked relief. They proved Redwall trade a seam sample slot had been reassigned to a palace batch already carrying a carving concern, and both records had reached Cedran as conclusions instead of warnings. Then the furnace warden found a margin mark beside Redwall House 7. Your Majesty, he said carefully. The seam sample request named a comparison formula. Winifred's fingers tightened. She knew what he was about to read before he read it. Redwall ash, lime pressure mix to be compared against Palace Firestone batch W19 for heat carry behavior. Cedran looked up. Belric went very still. The missing test had not only been cancelled, it had been the one test that would have compared Winifred's worker brick against the palace stone before either wall was judged. The next record would have to show who removed that comparison, and why the court was told one material was irregular while the other was ready. The removed comparison did not prove the palace had borrowed Winifred Oswelle's formula. It only showed the one test that could have compared Redwall ash brick against royal stone had been taken out of both decisions. The margin mark beside House 7 remained open beneath the furnace warden's finger. Redwall ash lime pressure mix to be compared against Palace Firestone batch W19 for heat carry behavior. Cedran Vaymark read it twice. No one interrupted him. Not the workers behind their ownership cords. Not Belric Thorne with his polished silence. Not Winifred, though the words struck something old in her. Something deeper than anger. Her walls had not asked to be admired. They had only asked to be measured before men brought hammers to homes. Comparison file, Cedran said. A Mason Guild records clerk brought a narrow green folder sealed with a cracked lime mark. Winifred was allowed closer under guard again, near enough to read if she leaned, not near enough to be treated as a professional withstanding. Belric watched the movement. Your Majesty, comparison requests are often exploratory. Removing one from final review is not proof of concealment. No, Winifred said. But when one material is called irregular and the other called ready, the missing comparison becomes the first honest question. Cedran nodded once to the scribe. Entered as technical builder witness statement. Still technical. Still witness. Still not restored. The clerk opened the file. Comparison request originated from Forge Safety Office after the 6th flare event. Purpose: determine whether Redwall shelter mix showed better heat carry behavior than decorative firestone proposed for nearby royal works. Belric's expression tightened. Better is not the language of the Mason Guild. The clerk checked the line. The written phrase is, different pressure behavior under heat. Read exactly. Cedran said. Determine whether Redwall ash, lime pressure mix and decorative firestone batch W19 require separate stress protocols before public-facing construction. Winifred inhaled slowly. Separate protocols. Not praise. Not condemnation. Testing. Cedran's eyes moved to the cracked dragon relief. Was the comparison completed? No, Your Majesty. The comparison was split. By whom? The clerk turned a routing slip. Mason Guild review intake. Seal group under Examiner Hallis Creed. Name on the split? Assistant Examiner Noel Varus. Belric lifted his chin. Hallis Creed is a cautious man. If the materials are legally different categories, splitting the file is proper. What categories? Cedran asked. The clerk read. Redwall ash. Lime pressure mix. Unauthorized shelter variants pending guild certification. W19 decorative firestone. Approved facade material pending final stress completion. Winifred's mouth went still. Unauthorized. Approved. Pending. Pending. The same unfinished state had been dressed in 2 different robes. That classification decided what happened next? Cedran asked. Yes. Redwall file returned to formula irregularity review. W19 file remained in Palace Works schedule. Did the split note say Redwall's formula variance was already registered with the city? The clerk searched. No. Did it say Redwall had 6 Forge Flare survival records attached? No. Did it say W19's pressure sample was partial? No. Belric spoke before the silence deepened. Classification lines are abbreviated. Full context remains in supporting folders. Winifred looked down at the green file. A family cannot live inside a supporting folder. No one opens. The scribe entered it. Cedran's hand rested on the table edge. His fingers were steady, but Winifred saw heat stir once beneath the glove, not rage thrown outward, but anger folding back toward its owner. He had been given a summary that made his command feel efficient. Now every folder made efficiency look like a blade with clean handles. "Material registry," he ordered. The city registry clerk brought Winifred's old filings forward. The pages were smudged with soot and oil from years of actual work. Shelter variance 32, registered 6 years past. Formula class: ash, lime pressure brick for forge, neighbor housing. Status: accepted for emergency shelter count, pending Mason Guild certification for expanded use. Expanded use, Winifred said. Not continued shelter use. The clerk swallowed. Yes, the pending field concerns expansion, not occupation of existing homes. Cedran looked sharply at the demolition summary. My summary said formula irregular. It did, Your Majesty. Did it say existing shelter use remained registered? No. Did it say pending certification concerned expanded use? No. Belrick's voice cooled. Existing tolerance does not guarantee long-term safety, which is why you test, Winifred said. Not condemn by omitting what tolerance was actually granted. The comparison file, split note, material registry, and royal summary did not prove anyone had stolen Winifred's formula. They did not prove Redwall's mix belonged in royal walls. They proved the same lack of final testing had been framed as danger for workers and administrative timing for the palace, while the comparison that might have clarified both was divided before Cedran ever saw it. Then the registry clerk paused over the back page of Winifred's variance. There is a custody notation, she said. Winifred's shoulders went rigid. Cedran heard the change in the room. Read it. Formula sample submitted to Mason Guild for certification review. Duplicate ash-lime ratio strip retained by Guild Materials Vault. Access logged twice after submission. Belrick's eyes did not move. Cedran's voice lowered. By whom? The clerk read the first line. Examiner Hallis Creed, for certification review. And the second? Palace Works, liaison, purpose, compatibility inquiry with West expansion, material schedule. The road seemed to narrow around Winifred. A compatibility inquiry was not theft. A vault access line was not proof of stolen formula. But her registered mix had been opened by the same Palace Works route that later called her walls irregular and royal stone ready. The next record would have to show who requested compatibility access to Winifred's formula, and why that access never appeared in the summary that condemned her homes. The compatibility access did not prove someone had stolen Winifred Oswelle's formula. It only showed her registered ash-lime ratio had entered the Palace Works route before her homes were labeled irregular. The words sat on the table colder than the cracked palace stone. Formula sample submitted to Mason Guild for certification review. Duplicate ash-lime ratio strip retained by Guild Materials Vault. Access logged twice after submission. First, Examiner Hallis Creed. Second, Palace Works liaison. Purpose, compatibility inquiry with West expansion material schedule. Winifred kept her hands flat on the shelter ledger because if she closed them, the leather might tear. Her formula was not a secret treasure hidden under a widow's pillow. It was registered because worker homes needed lawful recognition before the next forge flare. She had given the guild a ratio strip so masons could test it properly, not so palace offices could read it while calling her walls unauthorized. Cedran Vaymark looked toward the guild clerk. Name of liaison. The clerk read. Marcel Tovin, Palace Works liaison assigned to West Expansion Coordination. Date of access. 5th day of Emberwane. Cedran's eyes moved to the review packet. Before Redwall removal classification. Yes, Your Majesty. Before the 19th. Before the W-19 pressure sample review? Yes. Belrick Thorne folded his gloved hands. Compatibility inquiries are common when different materials occupy neighboring city plans. Palace Works may compare registry materials without implying adoption or misconduct. No one has entered misconduct, Winifred said. Only access. The restraint cost her. Belric heard it. Cedran heard it too, though he did not turn it into mercy. Entered as technical builder witness statement, Cedran said. Winifred Oswelle remains under guard. A record could carry her accuracy farther than her person was allowed to walk. Compatibility request, Cedran ordered. A Palace Works clerk hurried forward with a narrow slate-gray folder. The seal had been broken once and resealed with administrative wax. The clerk read, Request from Palace Works liaison Marcel Tovin to Guild Materials Vault. Purpose. Compare ash. Lime pressure behavior with decorative firestone batch W19 for possible joint schedule risk. Joint risk, Cedran said, meaning materials reviewed under overlapping construction calendar. The clerk answered. Winifred leaned slightly. Read the note below. The clerk's mouth tightened. Ash-lime pressure mix demonstrates heat. Carry distribution unsuitable for facade polish, but potentially useful in concealed stabilizing beds. The workers behind her drew in one breath together. Concealed stabilizing beds. Belric spoke at once. A compatibility note is theoretical. It does not mean the palace used the material. Many substances are examined for bedding layers and rejected. Cedran's face hardened. Use ledger. The palace steward opened the West Expansion Materials book again. Visible wall stone. White-veined decorative firestone. W19. Bedding mortar. Palace lime standard. Binder additives. Not specified on summary. Full ledger, Winifred said. The steward hesitated. Cedran did not look at her. Open the full ledger. Pages turned. Dust lifted. The steward read more slowly. Bedding mortar batch B4. Lime, river sand, kiln shell powder, ash temper. Winifred's heartbeat struck hard once. Kiln shell powder. Ash temper. Those words were not proof. Many formulas used ash. Many used shell. But the order mattered. The ratio mattered more. Ratio strip attached? Cedran asked. Not in this ledger. Where? Batch house worksheet, if preserved. Belric's voice remained disciplined. Your Majesty, bedding mortar may share ordinary ingredients with 100 city mixtures. Mistress Oswelle cannot claim lime and ash because she built worker houses. Winifred looked at him. I claim nothing yet. I ask to measure. The simplicity of it unsettled the court more than accusation would have. A woman denied proof, was asking for proof again. Cedran turned to the steward. Batch house, worksheet. A messenger ran toward the palace yard. No one cheered. No worker lowered a cord. The road smelled of dust, forge smoke, and the sour patience of people too poor to survive another official mistake. While they waited, Cedran opened his demolition summary again. Did my summary mention compatibility access? No, Your Majesty, the royal clerk said. Did it mention that Winifred's registered ratio had been reviewed for possible use in palace stabilizing beds? No. Did it mention Redwall's formula was registered for existing shelter use? No. Winifred saw the king's hand stop on the page, and this time she understood the motion. He was seeing the shape of a summary that had made him powerful by making him blind. He did not apologize. He did not restore her. But when a guard shifted closer to her shoulder, Cedran said, Give her room to read. Only room. Not honor. But room had been absent when the hammer rose. The messenger returned with a worksheet stained by lime dust. The steward unfolded it. Bedding mortar B4, lime base, river sand, kiln shell powder, ash temper, pressure ash trace. Winifred went still. Pressure ash was not a common decorative binder. Pressure ash was the heart of her shelter mix, the part that helped mortar carry force around heat-expanded brick. Belric's expression did not change. Trace amounts can appear through yard contamination. Finishing yards handle many ash products. Then a trace test can show whether it was contamination Or formula, Winifred said. Cedran's voice dropped. Was B4 used beneath the cracked dragon relief? The steward checked the placement line. Yes, Your Majesty. Bedding mortar B4 under relief course, and lower support bed. The compatibility request, bedding ledger, and batch house worksheet did not prove Belric Thorne stole Winifred's formula. They did not prove pressure ash had been deliberately added. They proved her registered formula was accessed by Palace Works before Redwall was condemned, and pressure ash appeared in the concealed mortar beneath the palace stone that had just cracked. Then Winifred noticed a small mark beside the batch notation. Not a signature. Not a confession. A shelter maker's ratio mark. 3 shortcuts beside a curved ash line, the way her late husband had marked trial strips so workers could read them by touch in smoke. Her throat closed before her voice came. That mark, she said, does not belong in palace mortar. The next record would have to show who copied an Oswelle ratio mark into the West expansion batch, and why the court called the same formula irregular when it held worker homes. The copied Oswelle ratio mark did not prove Belric Thorne had stolen Winifred's formula. It only showed a worker shelter mark had appeared, where palace records claimed ordinary bedding mortar. Winifred Oswelle stood with the shelter ledger open beneath her hands, staring at the 3 shortcuts and curved ash line on the batch house worksheet. For a moment, Redwall Worker District, the cracked palace relief, the guards, the masons, and Cedran Vaymark's crown all seemed to move far away. The mark belonged to work done in smoke and hunger. It had been cut into trial strips so builders could identify the ratio by touch when forge soot-blackened labels. Her husband had taught apprentices to read it with their thumbs. Now it lay in a palace file under a mortar batch no worker had been paid to supply. Cedran's voice cut through the dust. Mark registry. A Mason Guild archivist hurried forward with a narrow case of stamped strips. Belric Thorne did not object. That restraint mattered. A guilty man could be silent, but so could a careful one who trusted the next record to protect him. The archivist opened the case. Builder marks registered for shelter variance 32. Oswelle ash, lime pressure mix. 3 shortcuts curved ash line, registered by Thomas and Winifred Oswelle under Redwall shelter ledger. Winifred's face did not move at her husband's name. Cedran looked at her, and the old memory of smoke stirred behind his eyes again. This time, there was another shadow inside it. The recognition that the wall which had saved him had carried a widow's mark long before he signed an order against it. He did not apologize. Can that mark appear by accident? Cedran asked. The archivist answered carefully. A similar scratch could appear by accident. This exact builder mark, placed beside pressure ash notation, should indicate source recognition or copied ratio reference. Belric said, A reference is not theft. Guild reviewers may note a known ratio to compare behavior. Then the reference should name the registry, Winifred said. It should not hide inside palace bedding mortar while calling Redwall irregular. Cedran motioned to the scribe. Entered as technical witness statement. Still technical. Still not standing. The court would borrow the truth from her mouth and delay returning the dignity it had taken from her name. Batch house access log, Cedran ordered. The palace steward unfolded the finishing yard ledger. Batch B4, prepared at Thornhouse Finishing Yard. Ingredients measured by yard mixer Pellis Grant. Reviewed by materials overseer Jareth Kelm. Delivery accepted by Palace Works liaison Marcel Tovin, who added pressure ash. The steward searched the columns. Pressure ash listed under stabilizing trace. Source notation abbreviated. O ratio trial. Winifred's hand tightened on the ledger. O ratio. Belric's eyes shifted, not toward her, but toward the steward. Abbreviations are common in yard books. O may refer to oxide temper, outside ratio, or old batch correction. The steward looked uncomfortable. In this line, it is paired with the Oswelle mark. Silence moved through the masons like a draft under a door. Cedran's face remained controlled. Does the worksheet cite Redwall Registry? No, Your Majesty. Does it cite Guild Materials Vault access? No. Does it cite authorization to use a registered shelter ratio in palace mortar? No. Belric's voice hardened. Your Majesty, bedding mortar modification for ceremonial stone may be made under Yard discretion when no structural guarantee is claimed. Winifred looked toward the cracked relief. Then why use pressure ash at all? No one answered quickly enough. Cedran turned toward the palace wall. Open the bedding seam. Under the damaged relief. The order made the court stir. It was not punishment. It was not restoration. It was inspection, arriving late with a king's authority behind it. 2 palace masons knelt by the cracked white stone and removed a loose wedge of bedding mortar. The sample came away dark-veined beneath the polished face. Winifred was permitted to inspect it under guard, watched by Belric, Cedran, and every worker who had been told her walls were too crude for the capital. She did not touch the sample first. Heat plate, she said. A forge warden brought a small iron plate, the kind used for seam testing. The mortar wedge was warmed until the ash temper line darkened. It drew inward in 3 narrow bands, then carried the heat sideways instead of letting it climb straight through the stone. Worker families recognized the motion before nobles understood it. The same behavior had saved walls during forge flare. Winifred stepped back. That is not contamination, Belric said. It is not full formula either. No, she answered. It is a partial pressure, bed adaptation. Enough to borrow the behavior. Not enough to admit the source. Cedran looked at the darkened seam. Compare to Redwall sample. Winifred's eyes lifted. With owner consent and shelter witness. Cedran turned to the district registrar. Obtain consent from the householder. No wall is damaged beyond sample law. The owner of House 7, a thin man with burn scars across one wrist, nodded. Take it where Mistress Oswelle says. A seam scrape was taken from an interior repair joint, not a bearing corner. Winifred guided the place. Not as restored inspector, but as the only builder present who knew how not to weaken the home while testing it. On the heat plate, the red wall scrape darkened in the same 3-band pattern, fuller, denser, steadier. The ash bricks did not glow. They did not choose sides. They behaved as engineered material behaves when properly made. The batch house worksheet, mark registry, access log, bedding seam sample, and red wall comparison did not prove Belric Thorne personally stole the formula. They did not prove every Redwall wall was safe. They proved the palace had used an Oswelle-marked pressure behavior in concealed mortar, while Cedran's summary called Oswelle ash brick irregular enough to condemn occupied homes by exterior review. Then the guild archivist found a second copy of the O-ratio trial strip, filed under Palace Works compatibility. A red line had been drawn through the registry name. Beside it, someone had written, Unattributed, stabilizing method, acceptable for concealed use. Winifred's voice came low. Unattributed. The word was smaller than theft and uglier than mistake. The next record would have to show who removed the Oswelle name from the stabilizing method, and why the same mark was acceptable beneath palace stone, but dangerous on worker walls. The erased Oswelle name did not prove Belric Thorne had ordered theft. It only showed the palace had accepted a worker method, once the worker's name had been cut away from it. The red line through Oswelle looked almost delicate. It crossed the registry name without tearing the page, as if the hand that drew it wanted no drama, only absence. Unattributed stabilizing method, acceptable for concealed use. A sentence could bury a marriage, a workshop, 6 forge flares, and a district of families behind one polished word. Winifred Oswelle did not reach for the page. She had learned not to snatch truth from powerful tables. Let them read it. Let the court hear how cleanly a builder's name could be made inconvenient. Cedran Vaymark's voice was low. Attribution route. The guild archivist opened the compatibility file wider. Original entry. Oswelle ash. Lime pressure method. Shelter variance 32. Review note. Potential stabilizing behavior under heat load. Revision entry. Name struck, method reclassified as unattributed stabilizing method for concealed bedding use. Who revised it? Guild Classification Desk. Name. The archivist swallowed. Assistant Examiner Noel Veris prepared the revision. Examiner Hallis Creed approved classification. Mason office received copy. Belric Thorne's expression remained controlled. Uncertified methods cannot be formally credited as approved guild systems. If a behavior is observed but not certified, classification may describe function without granting ownership. Winifred looked at him then. Ownership was clear enough to mark my formula irregular, not clear enough to name it when the palace used it. Cedran turned slightly. Entered as technical builder witness statement. Still not restored. Still guarded. But this time the word technical sounded thinner, as though the court itself had begun to hear the insult under the usefulness. Was the Oswelle method certified? Cedran asked. No, Your Majesty, the archivist said. Certification pending. Why pending? The answer was already in the earlier files, but Cedran made them read it again. Seam sample review requested, then delayed for formula irregularity review and priority palace works. Later cancelled because district slated for removal. A circle, now with a name erased at its center. Belric said, certification cannot proceed after a district becomes subject to removal. That is ordinary administrative sequence. Winifred's voice did not rise. It became subject to removal before its test was allowed to prove whether certification was due. Entered, Cedran said. He did not say he was sorry. He did not ask her to trust him. But his hand, resting over the royal summary, closed once as though the paper had grown teeth. Concealed. Use approval, Cedran ordered. The Palace Works clerk read from the gray folder. Unattributed stabilizing method approved for concealed bedding trial, beneath decorative firestone W19. No public attribution required due uncertified status. No claim of structural guarantee entered. No claim of guarantee, Winifred repeated. Then why was it used under a wall, meant to stand before the city? The clerk looked toward Belric. Belric did not answer for him. Because W19 showed carving instability, the clerk said at last. A stabilizing bed was recommended to reduce movement. The workers behind the cords understood before the nobles did. Her method had been too irregular to protect their homes, but useful enough to hold a palace stone in place. Who recommended the stabilizing bed? Cedran asked. Palace Works liaison Marcel Tovin, citing guild compatibility note. And who received the copy at Mason office? The archivist read. Mason office senior review chamber. Receipt seal under Lord Mason's schedule. Belric's head lifted. Receipt seal is not my personal hand. No, Winifred said. But your report named my walls unsafe after your office received the note that their method could stabilize palace stone. The road went quiet. Cedran looked at Belric. Did your exterior review disclose that Mason office had received compatibility findings on Oswelle pressure behavior? Belric answered with precise calm. No. The exterior review concerned Redwall's visible condition, not palace bedding trials. Did your safety recommendation disclose that Redwall certification was pending because Mason office had not granted the review slot? No. Certification absence was a fact. A fact trimmed from its cause, Winifred said. The scribe entered it without being told. The royal clerk opened Cedran's demolition packet again. Your Majesty, the Crown summary names formula irregular, Mason Guild certification absent, exterior instability, relocation urgency. Does it mention Oswelle attribution was removed for concealed palace use? No. Does it mention the method was considered stabilizing under W19? No. Does it mention the cancellation loop? No. Does it mention no active danger finding had been entered? No, Your Majesty. Cedran turned toward Redwall. Children stood between doorways, wrists still corded. Smoke from the forges drifted over their roofs, and the ash brick walls held the ordinary darkness of worked material. They did not glow. They did not plead. They waited for law to become less cowardly than taste. Cedran faced the demolition captain. No tool touches Redwall, while attribution, certification, and active danger remain under review. A breath moved through the district, but no one cheered. Suspension was not justice. It was a door left unclosed. Belric bowed. "A prudent pause, Your Majesty." Cedran's eyes stayed on him. Not a pause. A legal halt pending public material inquiry. That was the first time the king had placed his own command between the Hammers and the Holmes. Not apology. Not enough. But public. Winifred felt it land, and refused to soften. Then the guild archivist turned the erased attribution page over. "There is a supporting note from an older shelter failure file," she said. Winifred's body went cold before the name was read. Public shelter at Ember Gate. Collapse during forge surge. Mason substitution inquiry unresolved. Deceased assistant builder. Thomas Oswelle. The world narrowed to one line. Thomas. Belric's face did not change, but his fingers closed around the edge of his report. Cedran looked at Winifred, and something in him finally seemed to understand that Redwall was not only about houses. The erased name, concealed use approval, and royal summary omissions did not yet prove who had killed Thomas Oswelle's work. They proved only that the same family method buried in a failed shelter file had reappeared without attribution beneath Palace Stone, while his widow's district was marked for removal. The next record would have to show why Thomas Oswelle's shelter failure was attached to the erased formula file, and who first called his work unsafe after replacing what he built. The Thomas Oswelle shelter file did not prove grief had been mistaken for evidence. It proved evidence had been buried, where only grief kept returning to look for it. Winifred Oswelle stood so still that the red ownership cords behind her seemed to hold the whole district upright. Public shelter at Ember Gate. Collapse during forge surge. Mason substitution inquiry unresolved. Deceased assistant builder. Thomas Oswelle. For 7 years, officials had spoken of Thomas as if he had loved an unsafe wall too stubbornly and died beneath his own mistake. For 7 years, Winifred had carried the insult because the dead could not argue with polished men, and widows were expected to make mourning quieter than stone. Cedran Vaymark's voice cut through the forge smoke. "Open the shelter failure file." Belric Thorne said nothing. His silence was not confession. It was calculation forced to wait for paper. The guild archivist unfolded brittle pages. Original Ember Gate shelter specification. Oswelle ash. Lime pressure bed. Fire. Shelter grade brick. Inner seam venting. Submitted by Thomas and Winifred Oswelle for public worker refuge. Approved? Cedran asked. Provisionally approved after 2 forge flare tests. Winifred's breath hurt. Cedran looked at the next page. Substitution. The archivist read, "Stone substitution entered before completion. Reason. Public frontage improvement and uniformity with royal approach. Fire shelter brick replaced on outer load course by white-veined decorative stone. Bedding method altered. Pressure venting reduced behind facade." A murmur moved through nobles and workers alike, but no one celebrated. A man had died inside that line. Who authorized the substitution? Cedran asked. Municipal Mason Office approval. Countersigned by then. Mason Lord Belric Thorne. Belric lifted his head. The Ember Gate shelter was an old municipal project. The substitution was for outer presentation only. The collapse inquiry never concluded decorative stone caused failure. No, Winifred said, because the inquiry remained unresolved. Cedran's eyes stayed on the file. Why unresolved? The archivist turned another page. Material samples from the collapsed shelter were transferred to Mason Guild review. Oswelle pressure bed samples missing from final packet. Decorative stone fracture report incomplete. Inquiry closed administratively, after no surviving claimant filed technical challenge. Winifred looked at them then. I filed one. A city clerk found the challenge slip. Widow challenge entered. Returned for lack of standing. Builder of record deceased. Co-builder status not recognized because guild certification incomplete. The circle had reached the dead. Cedran closed his eyes once, not softly. When he opened them, the king who had signed demolition looked older than the man who had ridden in with hammers. Recognition of co-builder status, he said. Belric's mouth tightened. Your Majesty, read the original specification signatures. The archivist read, Thomas Oswelle, Winifred Oswelle, Joint Shelter Builders. Cedran turned toward the scribe. Enter Winifred Oswelle as co-builder of record for Ember Gate and Redwall. Her standing is restored for material inquiry, shelter inspection, and formula certification. The word struck Redwall harder than the hammer had. Winifred did not bow. If she bowed now, restored standing might look like royal generosity instead of returned property. Cedran faced the district. Enter further. I signed condemnation of occupied homes before entering them, before reading fire, stress records, before seeing the cancelled seam sample, before learning certification was blocked by the office that used certification absence against them. The workers heard it. The masons heard it. Belric heard it. Cedran looked once toward the cracked palace relief, and I failed to enter what I already knew. Years ago, during a forge storm, I survived in a Redwall shelter. Winifred Oswelle's wall carried heat while royal stone split above the road. I let a summary teach me to distrust what had once saved my life. That was not forgiveness. It was public debt finally given its name. Material orders, Cedran continued. All Redwall demolition is void. Ownership cords remain valid. Emergency shelter rights stand. Crown funds repair smoke vents, roof scorch, and any damage caused by attempted demolition. Families threatened with unlawful removal receive winter rent credit and forge risk compensation. A sound broke behind Winifred. Not cheering, but breathing. Public inquiry, Cedran said. Belric Thorne is relieved of authority over Redwall, Palace Works, and Mason Office certification pending court review. His files, clerk seals, substitution records, and Thorne House finishing ledgers are seized. Examiner Hallis Creed, Noel Varys, Marcel Tovin, Roll de Mern, and scheduling clerks will stand as material witnesses. No confession is required for records to be read. Belric bowed with cold precision. I submit to lawful review. Procedure had built his prestige. Procedure would now strip each stone from it. Testing, Cedran ordered. Under Winifred's direction, samples were laid on the heat plate. Redwall seam scrape, Palace B4 bedding mortar, Ember Gate decorative stone remnant, and one preserved Oswelle pressure strip from the old file. The red ash brick sample darkened and carried heat sideways in steady bands. The Palace mortar copied the behavior weakly, enough to borrow stability without naming source. The Ember Gate decorative stone split along a polished vein under heat load. The test did not make Winifred's formula perfect. It made the substitution visible. The public reversal came without thunder. It came when the Mason Guild archivist stamped the record. Oswelle ash. Lime pressure method. Valid shelter formula pending expanded certification. Attribution restored. Concealed palace use unauthorized, without source and full stress testing. Winifred touched Tomas's old signature with 2 fingers. At last, the dead had been measured instead of blamed. Cedran stepped close, stopping where the guard had stood. Gratitude without justice is another insult, he said. Yes, she answered. So, I will not offer it as payment. Good. I will rebuild what my command threatened. You will let Redwall decide what it needs inspected, repaired, and kept. He bowed his head. Under your authority. Only then did Winifred look at him as more than a king reading too late. Not with forgiveness. Not yet. but with the first dangerous possibility that justice, if held long enough in public, could become ground where something living might be built. Behind them, the living ash bricks cooled into ordinary red silence. They had not chosen a queen. They had not punished a villain. They had done what good walls do, held under pressure until the truth inside them could be tested. And when the sun fell behind the dragon forges, Redwall Worker District still stood, no longer ugly in the record, while Winifred Oswelle opened her shelter ledger before workers, masons, nobles, and the Dragon King, who had finally learned that a wall's worth was not in how it looked before a procession, but in whom it refused to let burn.